Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing good. Today I am going to show how you could build a food recipe app using Context API and useReducer hook. Let me give you a quick tour of the app. In the header, we are going to cover search functionality, add recipe section and display all bookmark in the bookmark section. In the body, left section will list all the recipes with pagination. And right section, display the recipe ingredient where you could update the servings and bookmark the recipe. So let's begin. Open VS Code New Terminal in VS Code by clicking on the Terminal menu and then selecting New Terminal. This will open a terminal at the root of your project. In the terminal, run the command npx create react app myapp, replacing myapp with the name of your app. Wait for the command to finish executing. This will create a new directory with the same name as your app. In VS Code, open the new app directory by clicking on File-Open Folder and selecting the folder you just created. Now you can start the development server by running the command npm start in the VS Code terminal. VS Code has several extensions that can help you work with React, such as React.js code snippets, React.js and Redux snippets, and ES7 React/Redux/GraphQL/React Native snippets. You can install these extensions by clicking on the Extensions icon on the left-hand side of the window and searching for them in the marketplace. Congratulations, you've successfully set up a new React app in VS Code. From here, you can continue building out your app and customizing it to your needs. Before we move on with building Forkify app, let's print Hello World. Go to src folder, select app.js and remove the code inside header tag and type Hello World. It is throwing an error because we are not using logo anymore. So remove the logo import. Let's check the app. Awesome, it printed Hello World but it coming in center. Why? Because we have CSS in app CSS file. So, we need to clean this file and add margin and padding 0 to all HTML elements on the page using universal selector. Let's check now. Oh great, it looks nice now. Let's start with the header section. In the header, we have three sections: logo, search bar and the bookmark, add recipe section. We have a components folder which lists all the components. Inside components, we have a header folder which contains a list of all the header files such as JS and SCSS file. Inside the folder create header.js file, open the file and type refs command to get the format, or you can write it manually. Import this header component in the app.js file. UI will print Hello World now. Awesome, let's move ahead. I already had a HTML structure, so I will just uncomment the code. I will attach the repo link in the description so that you could refer to the same. I will explain what I did here. I created a main div which contains three sub-divs which further contains a child div. Each div has some classes which contain CSS. For icons, I am referring to Material UI icons. You can go to the material document and install the package for icons. So for CSS I am using Sass, it is similar to CSS only. Let me give you a brief intro on Sass. Sass is a preprocessor scripting language that is used to extend the capabilities of CSS. It allows for variables, nesting, functions, and other features not available in traditional CSS, making it easier to write and maintain style sheets. Sass code is compiled into regular CSS code that can be used by web browsers. If you need a detailed video on Sass, comment below, I will create a video on the same. As I already have the file named as header.scss, I will just uncomment the code and now our CSS is applied to the UI based on the class name. Awesome, we created a basic header UI. Now let's proceed with search integration. We have bookmark and add the recipe section as well, which we will cover at the end. Let's understand how search will work. For example, we need a recipe for pizza, so let's type pizza, and when we press search we are calling an API which in response gives us the data of recipe for pizza. Let me show you the response how it looks, and I am referring to a Foriki API, docs for APIs. I will put the link of the docs in the description. I hope you are clear up till now. Let me quickly uncomment rest of the header code. Okay, so what we are doing here is, whenever we are typing something we are calling an onChange function. I created one local useState to store the typed value. Afterward, when I click a button I called an handleClick function which is an asynchronous call. In order to handle the error if API fails gracefully we are using try-catch block, and inside try block we are calling an API and passing an argument and the API key which we can get from the docs. Once we get the response, we are dispatching the data to the useReducer hook. If you don't know the useReducer hook, it is similar to useState hook, but it will help to manage the state in a much cleaner manner. And for global state I am using a context API, so let me explain how context API works. The context API in React allows you to share state between components without having to pass props down through every level of the component tree. It provides a way to create global data that can be accessed by any component in the application, regardless of its position in the component hierarchy. Create a folder named as context. Inside it create a file called context.js. To use the context API, you first need to create a context object using the createContext function. Const recipe equals createContext. This creates a context object that can be used to share data between components. You can then define a provider component that will wrap the components that need to access the shared data. The context component takes in a children prop and wraps it with the recipe provider. It also defines a state variable data and a function set data that can be used to update the state. The value prop of the provider is an object that contains the shared data and the functions to update it. You can then access the shared data and functions from any component using the useContext hook. The header component uses the useContext hook to access the shared data and functions. It destructs the context object and uses them in the component as needed. By using the context API, you can share data and functions across components without having to pass props down through every level of the component tree, making it easier to manage and update state in your React application. Okay, let's come back to the onClick functionality. When we get the response we are dispatching the data to the reducer function. We created a separate reducer file which will update the state based on the type and data we will pass so that we will maintain the cleanness across the components. Once our state is updated we can use useContext to access our state across the applications. Let's console.log the state and see whether it is working or not. Oh nice. It is working properly, and on API success it is updating API data to the reducer state. In case anyone needs a lecture on the useReducer and context API, please comment below. I will love to make dedicated videos on them. As we are focusing on the project, so I am not explaining in depth about it. In the body, the left section lists the searched recipes and the right section displays the recipe details. Let me first uncomment the code for the body section. Here we created a div which contains two divs with 35% and 65% width. First we will cover the left section, so let's begin. Access the global state value via context API and if searched recipe is the state where we are storing the data whenever we click on search. If length is greater than 0 then map the state and display each item's image, title and publisher name on the left portion, otherwise show the loader. I already added the styles for the left section. You could also do the same, create a body.scss and paste the stylings from the repository attached in the description, or you could give your own styling. For loaders I am using Material UI. I added the inline styling to add the color to the loader. I am only showing 10 data per page, so I am doing a slicing here and storing the data in the useReducer state named as current data. I am using the slice method as it will not affect the original state and using the same to list the data for the first page. Now we need to uncomment the pagination code. And on click of previous and next we need to slice the original data and update the current data. What I did here is first I updated the useReducer state with a few more states which we need for pagination. So I created prevval, nextval and currentval with default values to track our pagination. Now in the function, when we click next we are increasing the count by 1 and for previous we are decreasing the count for all 3 states. Now to slice the data we need to do a little math here. To go next we need 2 values to slice the data, so I created 2 variables number 1 and number 2, where number 1 we are multiplying 10 with current page value, which is the updated state of current nav, and for number 2 we are multiplying 10 with current page plus adding 10, which is basically the value per page. Once we get these 2 values, I am slicing the original array and updating the current data state by dispatching the value. Same way I am handling the prevclick function. The only difference is I am subtracting the count by 1 to update all 3 pagination states. I created one local state to handle the total count. I added one use effect with dependency. What it will do is whenever we dispatch the data on clicking of search button, this use effect will trigger and it will update the current data with initial 10 recipes and update the count state with total pages length. But why do we need to count pages? Let me show you. In order to handle the next button in the UI, if we are on the last page we need to add the check to hide the next button and similarly hide the previous button when we are on the first page. So both the checks are added here and count state helps to hide the next button. Let's see the pagination in the UI. Great! Everything seems fine. We can move to the right section of the body now. Okay, let's move to the right section of the body, where we will preview the details of the selected recipe. Let me show you the UI of the same. For right section, we are displaying the selected recipe ingredients based on the servings. On base of the servings we are updating the quantity of ingredients. You can also bookmark the recipe. I hope you are clear with UI flow. I already added the HTML and CSS for the same. You can refer HTML and CSS from the repository. Link is in description. So let's move to the integration part. On clicking one of the recipes from the left section, it should display the recipe on the right section first thing. So here I added the handle preview recipe function, which basically calls an API with ID as a parameter to fetch the details of the selected recipe. Once we get the data we are dispatching into a new state created inside useReducer named as selected recipe data. Now we can use this state to access all the required values. The data where we are storing is an object, so we need to access all the values from this object and pass the values accordingly. Let me console log the data. So if you see, inside an object we had an ingredients array which contained lists of the ingredients. We need to map this array and show the ingredients. Great, now let's add the serving functionality. So whenever we click on plus or minus it will update the ingredients based on the serving value. For example, if you are serving for 2 people it will update the ingredients for 2 people only. I added an update serving function. What we are doing here is, it is updating the serving based on this formula where we need to multiply the new serving value with quantity and divide it by the old serving value which we are taking from API. We can also bookmark the recipe to revisit to the bookmarked page again. All the bookmarked recipes are listed in header bookmark. So what I did was I created one more state called as bookmark data in the useReducer hook, and whenever we are clicking on the bookmark icon we are checking if the data ID is present. If yes, then we are filtering the state, otherwise we are pushing the data to the bookmark data state. Once we have some bookmarked data, we could list those data in the header bookmark dropdown. I already added the HTML and CSS for the same. I am basically mapping all the bookmark data and showing the values in the dropdown. I already added the styling. You could copy the same from the repo. Now what I want now is whenever I am clicking on any of these bookmarked recipes it will show that. Let me show you. See, it is updating the recipe in the right body section. In order to achieve what I did was, we just need to update the selected recipe state with the clicked item value and update the ID in the URL. Awesome, it seems we are almost there. The only section we need to cover is Add Recipe section, so let's begin. First let me show you how it works in UI. If we click on Add Recipe it will open a pop-up which has input fields to enter recipe data and the ingredients. Asterisk mark denotes that it is a required field. Once we fill the required details and click on Upload it will call a post API, and at its success it is showing a toast message. Now the recipe is added. Let's search the title and check. See, it is giving the result with required details. Now let's move to our versus code. I already had the code set up. When I click on the Add Recipe button I am setting an Open Add pop-up state to true. I am using the Material UI component for the modal. I created a components folder inside the header folder and created a add recipe pop-up.js file which contains the modal. I am passing the Open Add pop-up state value to the dialog which has its own property open. You can check the Material UI modals. It will handle the open and close modal pop-up. I added the header, label and input fields. I recently found Grid CSS which is quite helpful in aligning elements into columns and rows. So I used Grid CSS for the alignment of the header, label and input field. You can refer the grid documents, I will attach a link below. Each input field has a name property through which we could target the specific field. I created a local useState to store input field's value. Now, whenever we are going to change something in any of the input fields we need to update our local state. I created a state named inputObj which is an object containing all the fields key and value pair. I wrote a function handle text change with an argument event, and based on the input field name which is our key in our local state, I am updating the value of the respective fields. Pass this function as a prop and then to the input fields. Now, whenever we type something in any of these fields it will update the state in the local state. Now we have an upload button, so when we click, it should call an API and send the data to it. I wrote a function called handleUpload. Okay, I want to point out on thing in the ingredient input field, the format will be quantity, unit and description. Let's jump back where we left. So here I am separating the quantity, unit and description from the string because ingredient value is a string. Once we get the ingredient details, we need to create a payload which contains all the field values in the format. Make sure the payload key is correct, otherwise the API will not understand and fails. Call the post API, pass the payload and set add pop-up state to false. We are also showing toast messages on the success, so we are making the open state true. For toast messages also I am using a material UI component. Let's check. Yes, it is working. Awesome. Thanks for being me till the end, and I hope you like it. If you have any doubts, comment below. I will respond ASAP.